This presentation focuses on the impact of sexual trauma on the brain. It will follow the experiences of Jessica and highlight the impact of sexual violence on the development of the social brain. Portions of this video contain an individual sharing her experience of sexual violence, which may be triggering to some survivors. This first video shares the story of Jessica and her birth.
Hi, my name is Jessica, and I guess I'm here to share a little bit about my story. My mom, her name was Sarah, and she loves me a lot. She was a pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital, and she really loved her job. But it was also really hard because when she was working, she had the late shift, and she would have to walk at night home to the train station. And at that time, my dad, his name is Rick, he would pick her up from work when he was home, but he got deployed to the Gulf War. And that was a really tough time for my mom, being alone and being pregnant and getting ready to have a family. My mom, she really does not like to talk about this time in her life, and but she calls me her miracle baby, and I didn't really know what that meant until recently. I assumed it was because I was the preemie baby. I mean, I was born at 33 weeks. But it wasn't until my junior year in college that I called her to get some advice for a friend that I really heard the full story. So when my dad was deployed on one of those nights that she had to walk to the train station at night, she was really brutally raped, and so much so she was hardly alive. It was 1991, and she was left to die in the alley. And after it happened, it was only because a neighbor happened to find her laying there. He was moving a trash can, and he saw my mom, and I mean, she lived, but after that, her only thought was about the baby. And she was hospitalized for 4 weeks to recover from the physical trauma of what happened, but the emotional piece of what happened lasted much longer. I couldn't believe it, but she told me that she didn't tell my dad when he was gone because she didn't want to distract him or to put him at risk or jeopardize the mission. So her mom came to be with her for a little while in Missouri until she got better and could go back to work, but she had nightmares and she had trouble sleeping and trouble eating, and she was really stressed, and she tried as much as she could to keep the baby, keep me inside so that I could be healthy and grow, completely. But she thinks her body just wouldn't let her anymore, and I was born. She told me that she blames herself and that she thinks it's because of the stress and the trauma of what happened, and that's what caused me to be born early. And this is actually why she calls me her miracle baby.
The first trimester of the pregnancy is a critically sensitive period of development because the fetus is very vulnerable to stressors from the maternal environment. when the mother experiences elevated physical and behavioral stress, it significantly impacts the neurobiological development of the fetus. And so, despite the extreme physical and emotional stressors that occurred during the prenatal period, baby Jessica made rapid progress in the NICU unit and was discharged home on her original due date. Along with her mother and father, baby Jessica's grandmother was present in the home to provide lots of support and care during the first years of her life. And so Jessica shared that while she did experience a few developmental delays, including late walking, late talking, these delays were resolved by the age of 3. In this video, Jessica shares her first sexual assault experience.
So by the time I was 10 years old, my mom and dad, they weren't together anymore. So my mom worked really hard to make ends meet, and she was working 2 jobs. And so I was home alone a lot after school, and I really liked playing with my toys, and I would pretend like I had a lot of friends. But one day there was a knock at the door, and I recognized it was Mr. Gentry, and he seemed, a little older, but a friendly face, and I let him know that my mom was not home anymore, or that she wasn't home right now, and he said, "That's okay, I came to see you, Jessica." And I was really surprised because I was only 10, and I don't get visitors, especially not adults, but he said that he came to visit me because he noticed that I was home alone a lot and if I would like to play. And I was really excited to maybe have somebody new to play with, and so I started showing him my toys, and he picked up one of my baby dolls, and he asked me if I wanted to play doctor. And I said yes, and he said that we would take turns, and that he would be the doctor first. And I said that I wanted to be the doctor, and he said to be patient, that I would have my turn. So he told me he was going to examine me, and that's when he touched my leg for the first time. And he started to rub my leg, and it made me uncomfortable because I had never been touched like that before. And he said that my leg was soft, but he said that he was just testing my senses. That was part of the game. And then I started to feel really uncomfortable, and I said that I wanted to stop, and he said no, that we had to finish playing the game. And that's when he slid his hand even further up my leg, and I got really afraid then, and I said to stop, and I started yelling, and then that's when he went even further, and that was the first time that I was ever molested. I kept telling him to stop, but he was a lot stronger than me. The next day I had to go to school, and on my way to school I saw there was a new crossing guard, and he said hello to me, and I just felt on edge, and just cautious of anyone new. But Mr. Gentry came every time to my house whenever my mom wasn't home, and he told me that I couldn't tell anyone, and that if I did, he would tell people that I invited him over and that I wanted to play like that. So I never told anyone.
And so, what we know is that children who are victims of sexual trauma may display a variety of symptoms, including nightmares, loss of interest, panic attacks, and depression. When discomfort is experienced, the amygdala processes the touch as threatening. A signal is sent to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus communicates with the body through the autonomic nervous system, specifically with the onset of acute trauma. The hypothalamus activates the medulla in the adrenaline glands. The adrenaline medulla secretes the hormone adrenaline, causing an increased heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing to prepare the body for fight or flight. Environmental stressors also secrete various stress hormones in our body, keeping the body in heightened state of arousal and vigilance to take action to survive. Children who have experienced sexual trauma and violence may show a decrease in their grades and school performance. The fear and anxiety caused by the trauma can impact a child's memory, concentration, and ability to learn. Since Jessica's abuser threatened her and told her it was her fault, she felt trapped between thinking she did something wrong and a sense that what was happening to her was wrong. She became very withdrawn and quiet. She lost interest in playing with her dolls and many times would become extremely upset when her mother would leave for work. Jessica became very withdrawn at school and found it difficult to concentrate during class. Since Jessica's mother was working the night shift and usually only spent time with Jessica on weekends, much of her decline went largely unnoticed. In this video, we learn about some of the experiences of Jessica during high school.
So by the time I was 16, I was in my junior year of high school, and I was dating my boyfriend. His name was Nate, and we'd been dating for about 3 months, and at that point I felt comfortable enough to be sexual with him. And he was a football player, and one night after a big football win, they were on an away game, and he was riding on the bus back, to our area, and he texted me and he asked me to send him a few pictures of me to, keep him company on the ride home. And I thought about it if I wanted to do that or not, but I trusted him and I felt safe, and so I sent him a few nude photos. The next day when I went to school, though, I overheard some friends talking about my boyfriend Nate showing the nude pictures of me to other people, and including the football team. And after receiving the pictures, a few other members of the football team also shared the photos, and it basically went viral. And as soon as I saw this happening so quickly, I felt violated, but like there was this physical takeover of my body. I felt like I just wanted to disappear. My hands were clammy. I started to get sweaty, and my heart was beating really quickly. And at that moment, I started to remember the things about Mr. Gentry that I was trying really hard to forget. And I started to feel really confused and overwhelmed, but I tried to go to class, and when I was in class, I couldn't hold it in anymore, and I started to cry, and I put my backpack on, and I left the classroom, and I went home. But later that night, I got on social media, and I saw that my picture was posted everywhere. And not only that, but people were writing comments all over the pictures, really mean things I would never imagine saying to people. Even so much so, like, how would a football player see anything in that fat pig? Or if I looked like that, I would never take photos of myself. And I was just absolutely devastated. And I didn't go back to school for the rest of the week. I kept saying that I had a stomach ache and I couldn't go to school. And I really didn't go back to school. My boyfriend broke up with me on Facebook, and that was all out for display. And I finished classes online to get, to graduate, but I didn't go to prom, and I didn't go to any other parties, and I was just really looking forward to leaving town, going to college, and starting over.
So during adolescence, unused connections in the thinking and processing part of the brain are pruned away, whereas connections that are consistently being used are strengthened. This is also referred to as the use it or lose it. And this pruning process begins in the back part of the brain. Because the prefrontal cortex matures relatively late, adolescents at times rely on a part of the brain called the amygdala to make decisions and solve problems, particularly emotionally charged issues. Individuals in later stages of adolescence, 15 to 17 years old, show greater stress-induced cortisol levels than individuals in earlier stages of adolescence, 9 to 13 years old. And we see in this picture how cortisol seems to increase as an individual's brain develops and ages. Jessica may have acted impulsively by sending her picture to her boyfriend, but for teens who have a history of abuse, this impulse behavior may have been more apparent. Often these youth have developed brains that focused on survival at the expense of the more advanced thinking that happens in the brain's cortex. An underdeveloped cortex can lead to increased thinking that impulse behavior, as well as difficulties with tasks that require higher level thinking and feeling. Maltreatment as younger children can have negative effects on the brain development during adolescence. Adolescents with a history of child maltreatment can have decreased levels of growth in the hippocampus and amygdala compared to non-maltreated adolescents. In this video, Jessica talks about her experience in college.
By the time I was 20, I was in my junior year at college, and I was studying psychology. I was working really hard. I had a job in a restaurant. I also was an RA to get free room and board. But I was really so glad to be away from my childhood home, my childhood trauma, and just putting it behind me. And so I was not in a romantic relationship, which is exactly how I wanted it. And for the most part, I have a few close friends, but I stayed away from the whole college scene thing. I didn't want anything to do with it. But one Saturday morning, really early in the morning, it was 3 a.m., and I got a knock on my door from one of the residents. And she came to get me because her roommate had just come back to their room and was really upset. And so I went to her room. Her name is Shayla, and Shayla was on the floor in a ball, rocking back and forth and crying. And I sat down next to her and just tried to comfort her and ask her what was wrong and what had happened. And I noticed that she had scrapes across her neck. And after a few minutes of sitting with her, she starts to tell me about what happened over the last 6 hours and about her sexual assault. And I had gone through training to be an RA, so I knew how to handle the situation, what the protocol was, and Shayla's roommate agreed to take her to the emergency room to be checked out, and to have a rape kit done. And so at that point, Shayla, she left for the hospital, and she thanked me for being there. And I went back to my room, but I had a really hard time going back to sleep. And the next day, all I could think about was my own sexual assault and what had happened to me. And it was like flashbacks coming at me. And it was time for me to go on Monday to class, and I could not get out of bed. I felt nauseous, I felt weak, and I just wanted to be alone. I was a little shaky and nauseous, but by 10 o'clock, I gathered myself to get out of bed and go to my psychology class because I knew a quiz was coming up and I didn't want to miss it. And that day, unfortunately, the topic was sexual assault. And as the class is going on, I start to all of a sudden feel like this panic and like I can't breathe. And I get up and I go out into the hallway to try to get some water, and I feel like I'm ready to pass out at this point. And the professor came out of the room and just saw how distressed I was and asked if it would be okay for him to call the school counselor, and I agreed. And so later that day, I saw the therapist, essentially, at my school, and I started with her by talking about what had happened on Friday night with the resident and her sexual assault, and then what happened in the classroom when we were talking about sexual assault. And over the course of several sessions, I eventually started to open up and share my own history of abuse and harassment, and that's when the healing could really start to happen. Just the cumulative effect of all the painful, traumatic experiences that I had gone through.
Mirror neurons allow the brain to create a connection which causes individuals to positively respond to the other individuals in stress. Under normal circumstances, the responding individual may be able to remain in allostasis. However, a traumatized person that is exposed to another stress, such as hearing the details of another sexual assault examination, may become dysregulated when exposed to vicarious or secondary trauma and not be able to remain numb. Due to repeated long-term activation of the HPA axis and the NSS, the brain has reached allostatic load. And here is an example of the normal stress response versus severe to frequent stress response. Jessica has tried to achieve stability in her life by avoiding stressful, triggering situations and only being with what she defines as safe people. Behaviors such as staying away from the college scene, avoiding romantic and sexual relationships, and trusting very few people, and really focusing on school and work are ways that she is creating adaptive and preventive behaviors. When Jessica first responds to the situation in the dorm, her stress response system is activated. Mirror neurons allow Jessica to create a connection with Shayla as Jessica lowers her voice, softens her gaze, and relaxes her posture. Jessica's stress response system is activated by Shayla sharing the details of the sexual assault exam. However, she is able to remain in allostasis. But later on, during the class lecture on sexual assault, Jessica is re-triggered. When Jessica begins meeting with the therapist, she is diagnosed with PTSD. She begins to learn and understand how the repeated trauma has impacted her mentally and physically. In this video, Jessica shares the experience of working at a law firm.
By the time I was 28, I was a successful lawyer at a really big law firm in downtown, and I was doing great there. All of the partners kept telling me that I was a superstar and that if I kept doing everything like I was doing, that soon enough I would be a partner. And I was really flattered by that because they had never had a female partner. They had never considered a female to be a partner at the firm. And so I was feeling really good about myself. And with that kind of rising star status, I was invited to a meeting with several other male partners and a male associate as well. But I was the only female in the room, which can happen a lot in this field. But in the middle of one of the meetings, one of the male partners, his name was Trevor, he got up from his chair and he walked over to where I was sitting and he started to rub my shoulder. And it made me feel really uncomfortable. And it kind of felt like it came out of nowhere, but I didn't want to make a scene. So eventually he stopped and he went back to his seat. I was really shocked and I felt uncomfortable and I thought, it'll go away, even though I knew it probably really wouldn't. And it didn't go away. It actually got worse. It got a lot worse. So one day I was cleaning my office, and after a really big case, kind of cleaning things up, and Trevor, the same guy, he comes into my office and he tells me, you should really wear stilettos. It would give me something great to look at during all these boring meetings that we're a part of. And during the meetings, I would catch him staring at my chest and just being really inappropriate, making me feel uncomfortable all the time. And when I tried to tell other people about it, they told me that I was imagining it, or they were saying that I shouldn't dress that way. Even though it was like no way in particular, I was just dressing professionally. And they also said, what else do you expect working in such a prestigious firm full of old men? You're the only woman. And so it was like, I should expect this. And not only should I expect it, but that it's acceptable. And it really felt like the sexual harassment was getting worse, but I was the only person that could see it. And then one day, after a meeting with the partners, we left, we were leaving the room, and Trevor pat me on the butt right there in front of everybody. And the other men who were there, the other partners and the other associates, they said, "Oh, now I see how a first-year associate gets invited to meetings like this." And they were all laughing. And I was completely humiliated, and it totally discredited the hard work that I had been doing and the credit that I was being given. It was just gone. And after that happened, I was home for 5 days. I couldn't get out of bed, and I didn't answer my phone. I didn't go to work. I didn't shower. I didn't answer any knocks at my door. And eventually my friends came to check on me because I wasn't responding, and I had just completely shut down.
The brain's defense circuitry is a network of regions that scans incoming sensory information for signs of danger, and once it detects stress, it triggers responses in the brain and the body. This circuitry includes the amygdala and the brainstem. When the brain's defense circuitry is in control, it impairs the prefrontal cortex, resulting in bottom-up attention, resorting back to survival reflexes and old self-protection habits from prior experiences, and results in altered memory encoding and storage. For Jessica, we saw her resort back to her fear brain and resorting back to a fear freezing type response. And many researchers believe that there are 3 types of freezing responses: detection freezing, shocked freezing, and no good choice freezing. The detection freezing is the first few seconds of freezing that we experience when we first have a moment of shock or a moment of trauma. The shock freezing is the freezing after that. It extends a little bit longer. It is, again, where we have a blank mind, no behavior to choose from. The no good choice freezing is where we do have options, and still our prefrontal cortex has no capacity. It's still not engaged, but the choices we have are really not effective or appropriate choices. They usually are the choices that are connected to the prior history of trauma we may have experienced. And so with an impaired prefrontal cortex, only very simple thoughts arise about reflex and habit responses that are extremely reactive or passive. And so here Jessica meets with her counselor.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm glad that I'm here too. It's hard, but I think it's helping, and so I'm glad that I'm here with you.
Well, I am glad to hear that, and I want to spend some time just explaining what's been going on in your brain, because I think it's important for you to understand that. And I know the most recent incident, which was the sexual harassment at work, and you going home and getting into bed and not being able to get out of bed, was a really hard one for you to process. And I want to explain what happened for you. And what really happened was your brain went into this freeze mode, right? And your prefrontal cortex shut down, and it was no longer functioning. You no longer had thought processes, and you went into not having the options. And your amygdala took over. It's what started the thought process. It's the only place that your ideas were coming from. And also what happened is you went into your survival mode. And what happened in your survival mode was you went back to your 10-year-old place. You went back into your 16-year-old place, and you went back to resorting whatever were the modes of survival you used back then were the only things that you knew how to use now again as an adult, because that's what the brain had trained to do.
It's like wired in that way.
It's wired in that way now. And so to conclude, we wanted to provide some principles of support. While there are many principles of support, we just wanted to highlight that it is so important to be competent, to really ensure that you are creating a relationship that is one of empowerment, because individuals that have experienced sexual violence are used to being in relationships of disempowerment and betrayal and betrayal of trust, and so ensuring that your relationship with them is one that's built on trust and empowerment, and ensuring that there is connection. There are many resources listed on the internet, and these are just some of them that you can reach out to for additional support and help. And again, thank you